The moment I stepped into my sister's engagement hall, the lights, music, and glittering decorations blurred into the background as a sharp burst of laughter rose behind me, quiet enough to pretend it wasn't meant for me, but clear enough to make sure it landed exactly where they intended. My parents stood together, leaning in with the kind of cruel amusement they rarely bothered to hide when it came to me. "She still can't find a real boyfriend," my father said, his voice raised just enough to slice through the noise. It wasn't a joke spoken in confidence, it was a performance delivered for an audience. A few relatives nearby exchanged knowing smiles, as if my love life, real or imagined, was a form of entertainment arranged specially for the evening. I hadn't taken more than 2 steps before my mother glided toward me with her polished smile, the one she used whenever she wanted her words to sting without appearing sharp. She placed her hand on my arm so gently that anyone watching would think she was comforting me. "Sweetheart," she said, tilting her head with exaggerated sympathy, "you don't need to pretend anymore. We all know he's imaginary." The sentence dropped between us like a glass shattering, delicate yet humiliating. Soft chuckles rippled through the circle around her, polite, restrained, but each one carving a deeper mark than the last. I felt dozens of eyes brush over me, assessing, pitying, amused. In that single moment, it didn't matter how quietly I carried myself, how much effort I had poured into simply existing without causing trouble. To them, I was the easy target, the harmless storyline, the punchline they felt entitled to repeat. And as I stood there in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by people who claimed to love me, the strangest part was realizing they genuinely believed I was supposed to laugh along with them. As I moved deeper into the engagement hall, it felt like every relative had rehearsed the same line before I arrived. One after another, they approached me with raised eyebrows and polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "So, when will we finally meet this mystery man of yours?" they asked, their voices dripping with disbelief. They weren't curious. They were waiting for me to crumble, to confess that I had invented someone just to feel less alone. And they enjoyed every second of it. But the worst blow came when my sister, glowing in her engagement dress like the star of a show I was never meant to be part of, leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You could have just told us you're alone," she whispered, lips curving into a smile so polished it almost hid its cruelty. "No shame in that." But it wasn't sympathy, it was triumph, the kind of smirk someone wears when they believe they've won. In that moment, surrounded by people who loved the version of me that stayed small, single, and silent, I felt the air tighten around me. They didn't just doubt my relationship, they needed it to be a lie. Because in a family that liked me single, the idea of someone choosing me was the one thing they couldn't laugh off. Somewhere between the laughter, the whispers, and the sideways glances, the truth settled over me with a clarity I hadn't expected. They weren't mocking me because they genuinely believed I'd invented a boyfriend. They were mocking me because the idea of someone loving me, seeing value in me, made them uneasy. My happiness, my relationship, my worth, all of it threatened the quiet hierarchy they'd built where my sister shone effortlessly and I remained the harmless shadow beside her. And on her big day, the thought of attention drifting toward me, even for a moment, was something none of them could tolerate. So they needed the joke. They needed the doubt. They needed me to stay small. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't waste a single breath trying to correct their narrative. I simply looked at each smirk, each whispered comment, each dismissive glance and thought, fine. Let them talk for now. Because the difference between humiliation and revelation is timing, and mine hadn't arrived yet. The music was loud, laughter was rising, and the room felt comfortably sure of its own assumptions when the entrance doors swung open with a slow, deliberate push. At first, people glanced over the way they always do, half interested, half distracted, until their faces stiffened as if someone had pressed pause on the entire celebration. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses stopped midair. My sister's smile faltered, and even my parents' laughter clipped into silence. Because he walked in. Confident. Calm. Every step measured, every detail about him undeniable. Not imaginary. Not pretend. Not a story they could twist into a joke. Very real. and more striking than any of them were prepared for. It felt like the gravity in the room shifted toward him, heads turned one by one, drawn to the presence they swore didn't exist. Their whispers evaporated. Their certainty crumbled. And for the first time that night, the embarrassment wasn't mine, it was theirs. The moment he stepped fully into the hall, the shock on my parents' faces was almost theatrical. My father's drink froze halfway to his lips, trembling just slightly as if his mind couldn't decide whether to lift it or set it down. My mother's smile, bright, polished, and practiced for guests, collapsed in an instant, slipping into something tight and uncertain. They looked at him, then at me, then back at him again, their eyes widening a fraction more each time, as if reality kept contradicting the story they'd been telling about me all evening. The joke wasn't funny anymore, not when the man they insisted was imaginary stood there more real than their own assumptions. And then he moved. He walked straight toward me with a confidence that rippled through the room, placed a warm, steady hand on my back, and bent just close enough to say, "Sorry I'm late, love." His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The entire hall fell silent. It was the kind of silence that exposes the truth in one breath and shatters every lie spoken before it. The transformation in the room was almost laughable. Minutes ago, I was the girl with the imaginary boyfriend, the quiet afterthought they could mock without consequence. Now, the same relatives who raised their eyebrows at me were suddenly hovering around, pulling out chairs, offering me drinks, asking eager questions they hadn't cared about 10 minutes earlier. Their forced smiles trembled under the weight of their own embarrassment, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel small, I felt seen. Not because they valued me, but because their narrative had just collapsed in front of them. And then came my parents, moving toward me with careful steps, their confidence drained from their faces. My mother leaned in, her voice low, shaky, unable to find the authority she once wielded so effortlessly. You never told us he was real," she whispered, as if those words might soften the humiliation unraveling around her. I met her eyes, calm, steady, no anger left to give, and said quietly, "You never asked." The truth hung in the air between us, sharp and undeniable. And in that moment, the reversal they deserved settled over the room like a final verdict. For the first time in my life, I watched the spotlight, one that had always belonged to my sister, shift away from her flawless smile and sparkling dress. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, like a quiet ripple spreading across still water. People who had been orbiting around her all night slowly turned their heads toward me, drawn not by noise or chaos, but by the undeniable presence of the man standing by my side. My sister's expression flickered, surprise first, then confusion, then something sharper as she realized the attention she collected so effortlessly was slipping through her fingers. And I didn't have to do anything. I didn't raise my voice, didn't wave my arms, didn't try to prove a single thing. I didn't brag or list the insults they'd thrown at me. I simply stood there, steady and unbothered, as the truth they'd mocked fell apart right in front of them. When he gently intertwined his fingers with mine and leaned in with a quiet confidence no one could deny, the room seemed to freeze in place. Conversations died mid-sentence. Smiles hardened. My parents stared at us like their entire narrative had just been rewritten without their permission. The same man they dismissed as imaginary was now the reason everyone in the hall was questioning everything they'd assumed about me. And as I met each stunned gaze, I let a slow smile rise, not out of revenge, but out of realization. This wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about finally seeing myself without the shadow they'd kept me in. They thought belittling me made them bigger. They thought ignoring me made me weaker. They thought mocking me kept me in my place. But they were wrong about everything. They didn't just underestimate my life. They underestimated the wrong daughter.